You ever get that feeling like you're switching between different modes? Head down focused work and then just chilling out? Or how online games kind of blur that line between what's real and what's fantasy?
Hmm.
Or even just like wrestling with an idea that's somewhere between making sense and total confusion? That sort of in-between space. That's what we're digging into today.
Yeah, that liminal
We're
space.
calling it interrealm, basically, what's going on in those gaps.
Exactly. And for this deep dive, we've gathered some really fascinating stuff. We're looking at this idea from all sorts of angles you might not expect.
Like what?
Well, think technology, definitely gaming worlds, fictional universes, even how businesses use the term, and some pretty interesting philosophical takes too.
Okay.
So the mission today is really to unpack this interround concept. What does it actually mean? How does it pop up in all these different areas? And, why does it seem to resonate so much?
All right, so let's nail down the basics first. Interrealm. I mean, the sources say the name itself is pretty simple, right? Between, realm for domain.
Yeah, straightforward etymology.
Yeah.
Between realms, between domains, that's the core.
But it feels like that simple definition just cracks open a door to something way bigger.
It really does. And think about similar words too, like interworldly, interdimensional, even interdomain. They all kind of circle that same idea, bridging separate spaces.
And the opposite, intrarealm, within one space.
Exactly. That contrast helps. It
Yeah.
sharpens the focus on the links across boundaries, not just what happens inside them.
Right. And what really hit me looking through all this material is just how, well, everywhere this idea seems to be. Sometimes hidden, sometimes obvious.
Hmm.
From like the nuts and bolts of how our digital systems talk to each other, all the way to, completely imagined universes and books. Interrealm is there.
It really is.
Yeah.
So yeah, get ready because we're about to explore some pretty varied territory, all under this banner of Interrealm.
Okay, where do we start? The digital world sounds like a good concrete place.
Yeah, let's do that. It gives us some really solid examples of Interrealm in action. Think about situations where you've got separate, isolated computer systems, but they still need to talk to each other in a really controlled way.
Okay, makes sense. Our sources flagged a couple of big examples. First up, Software AG's universal messaging platform. They talk about interrealm communication. For someone not deep in tech, what's the gist?
Okay, imagine a big company, right? Different departments, maybe finance, HR, sales. They might each have their own internal messaging system, their own little communication realm.
Uh-huh.
Universal messaging lets these separate systems share specific information. But, and this is key, it's not just an open door. Someone has to deliberately switch on and allow for interrealm setting.
Ah, okay.
It's about building specific managed bridges between systems that are meant to be separate most of the time.
So it's like setting up specific customs checkpoints between countries, not just erasing the borders completely. And you mentioned different security levels for these connections.
Precisely. They have different protocols for it.
Mhm.
NSP and HP are the standard ones, non-encrypted. Then you've got NSPS and HPS, which are the secure encrypted versions. And yeah, the recommendation is definitely to use the secure ones, NSPS and HPS.
Makes sense.
And another important point, if you have a cluster of these messaging systems working together, all the realms in that cluster need to have identical settings for these inter-realm links. That way, if one part fails, another can pick up the slack seamlessly. It's all about resilience.
Engineered resilience, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, that clarifies that one. The other big tech example was Kerberos authentication and Active Directory trusts. This sounds a bit heavier.
It is a bit more complex, yeah. But it solves a super common problem, especially in big organizations. How do you securely access stuff across different parts of the network, different security domains, or forests, they call them, without having to log in again and again?
Right, that'd be annoying.
Totally. So inter-realm or cross-realm authentication here lets you prove who you are once in your home domain and then access resources in another trusted domain. Kind of like your work ID badge, getting you into different buildings owned by the same company, even if they have slightly different security desks.
Okay, so how does that trust actually get set up between these different domains? What's the mechanism?
It all hinges on establishing a formal trust relationship.
Yeah.
And that trust is secured by a shared secret, basically a password that both domains know. It's called the Interrealm Trust Key, or just Trust Password.
Ah.
This key is stored securely in something called a Trusted Domain Object, or TDO, on both sides. It's the foundation of the secure link.
And I was reading that these keys don't just stay the same forever, they change for security.
Exactly right. There's a service called netlogon that automatically rotates these trust keys, usually every 30 days. It's a really important security feature to limit the window of opportunity if a key were ever compromised.
That there was a potential issue mentioned. If someone set a weak key manually.
Yeah, that's a nuance. If an administrator manually set up the trust with a weak password, and it hasn't had its first automatic rotation yet, it could theoretically be more susceptible to an attack called curb roasting, which tries to crack those keys. It just highlights that even with automation, initial configurations matter.
Okay, so let's walk through it. Say I'm in domain A, my main work network. I need a file from a server over in domain B. What happens?
Right, it's this kind of digital dance with tickets. Your local domain controller, the Key Distribution Center, or KDC in domain A, handles the first part. When you log in, you get a primary ticket, a ticket granting ticket, TGT.
Okay.
Now, when you try to access that server in domain B, your KDC in domain A sees it's in a different realm. So instead of giving you a normal service ticket for it, it gives you a special referral ticket. Think of it as an introduction letter to domain B's KDC.
And this letter uses that shared trust key.
Exactly. It's encrypted with the Interrealm trust key. Your machine then takes this referral ticket over to domain B's KDC. That KDC uses the shared key to decrypt it, checks if it's legit, and then finally issues the actual service ticket that lets you access the file server.
Wow. Okay, that's quite a few steps just happening under the hood. And it sounds like managing security across these connected domains is an ongoing challenge. You mentioned research.
Yeah, absolutely. People are always looking at ways to manage how that trust flows. For example, using hierarchical models
Yeah.
so that if one domain gets compromised, it doesn't automatically compromise every domain it trusts or that trusts it. It's about limiting the blast radius, essentially. Balancing that seamless access with strong security is always the goal.
Right, a constant balancing act. Now, completely switching gears here, the no programming language came up. It sounded like it builds this interrealm idea right into the code itself.
It does, yeah. It's pretty innovative. No, which is related to the Go language, actually puts rules about realms, these isolated execution spaces, directly into its type system.
How does that work in practice?
Well, the core idea is controlling who can change what. Basically, a piece of data, an object, can only be modified by code running in the same realm the object belongs to.
So each realm is like its own little protected sandbox. And the language itself stops code from one sandbox messing with data in another unless you specifically allow it.
That's a great way to put it. A secure container, yeah.
Yeah.
The language figures out the realm context, usually by looking at the sequence of function calls, the call stack. If code in realm A needs to look at data in realm B, what Gano calls a foreign object, it can sort of observe it, but it can't just change it.
Okay, but sometimes you need to change things across realms, right? How does a programmer make that happen intentionally?
Gana has specific crossing functions. You mark a function specially to signal it's designed to be called from another realm, and then to actually call it, you use this distinct syntax, cross, FN. It makes the jump between realms really explicit and obvious in the code.
That's clever.
Yeah, and they even provide tools like std current realm and std previous realm so the code can check, where am I running now and where did this call come from?
It sounds like that gives developers incredibly fine-grained control, which I guess is super important for things like blockchains or other decentralized systems where you absolutely need that security and clarity around data modification.
Exactly. Gano is essentially taking these complex ideas about isolation and secure interaction and building them right into the language structure. It helps developers think about security in terms of these realm rules, which should lead to safer, more robust applications, especially in those decentralized contexts.
Okay, fascinating stuff on the tech side. So from programming languages, let's jump into somewhere maybe more familiar for a lot of people. Games and virtual worlds. Interrealm feels like a big concept there, even if it's not always called that.
Oh, absolutely. In gaming, Interrealm usually shows up as features connecting players across different servers or creating shared spaces where people from separate game worlds can interact.
The classic example that jumped out from the sources was World of Warcraft. Cross-realm battlegrounds, CRPGs. I definitely remember when those came in. What was the main driver?
Yeah, CRPGs were a pretty big deal. The primary goal was simple: shorter queue times for PvP, the player versus player stuff, especially on servers that didn't have huge populations or where one faction heavily outnumbered the other.
Right, waiting forever for a match is no fun.
Exactly. So by letting players from different realms, wow, that's a term for servers, all queue up together, they could get matches popping much faster for everyone involved.
And that technology kind of evolved, didn't it, into things like cross-realm zones and sharding. How do those fit in?
Yeah, it expanded. Cross-realm zones, or CRZ, aim to make the open world feel less empty on lower pop realms by mixing players from different servers into the same zone instance. Sharding is maybe a bit different. It's more about dynamically creating multiple copies of a zone to manage population density and keep the game running smoothly, though sometimes shards can pull players from different realms too.
And players themselves sort of created their own version with mega servers.
That's right. You saw this trend where players would coordinate to all role characters on specific, already high population realms, creating these huge, bustling server communities, kind of an organic, player-driven consolidation.
But these cross-realm features, they weren't universally praised, were they? I remember a lot of debate about the social impact.
Oh yeah, huge debate. And it still goes on. On one hand, you have the undeniable convenience, faster queues, more people around for group quests. But on the other hand, a lot of players felt, and still feel, that it really diluted the sense of community and identity tied to a specific server.
How so?
Well, things like your server reputation, knowing the big guilds, recognizing names in town or out in the world, long-standing rivalries. A lot of that gets lost when you're constantly grouped with anonymous players from dozens of other realms. It can feel a bit depersonalized.
Like the difference between a small town and a giant city, maybe. Easier to get things done in the city, but you lose that tight-knit feel.
That's a good analogy, yeah. It's that trade-off. Efficiency versus social cohesion, convenience versus community identity, a really tricky balance for developers.
Okay, shifting to a newer game, Nightingale. It uses interrealm travel with crafted realm cards as a core mechanic. That sounds like a really deliberate way to weave the concept into gameplay.
It really is. It's central to Nightingale. Players gather materials, craft these different realm cards, and then use combinations of cards when they open a portal.
And the cards determine what the next realm is like.
Precisely. The specific mix of cards influences the environment, the resources you'll find, the creatures, the weather, the challenges, basically the entire character of the procedurally generated Feywild realm you step into.
So traveling between realms isn't just like clicking a button to teleport. It's an active part of the game planning your journey, shaping the world you're about to explore. That gives the player a lot of control.
Exactly. It blends procedural generation, meaning a potentially huge variety of worlds, with player agency through the card system. Inner Realm here isn't just getting from A to B. It's fundamental to exploration and how you experience the game. Really clever design.
Yeah, that sounds cool. And even going back further to Crusader Kings II, there was talk, maybe just a proposal about interrealm alliances. What was the idea there in a big strategy game?
Right. This was a proposed feature, though I don't think it ever made it into the game. The idea was to let vassals, the lords serving under a king or emperor, form alliances with vassals who serve different kings or emperors.
Ah, okay. Normally alliances are mostly within your own top ruler's domain.
Yeah, mostly. So this would have allowed, say, a powerful duke in France to ally with a duke in the Holy Roman Empire, even though their kings might be rivals. The thinking was it could add historical realism, reflecting those complex cross-border relationships, and make the political game more dynamic.
I can see the appeal, but wow, that sounds like it could get complicated fast, especially in a game as intricate as CKII.
Oh, absolutely. That was the big counter-argument. How would the AI handle it? Could it lead to really messy, confusing wars where your ally suddenly becomes your enemy because your kings went to war? And just the sheer complexity tracking all those potential cross-realm ties could have been a nightmare for game performance and balance.
Yeah, engine strain makes sense. It shows how even a seemingly simple interrealm connection can have massive ripple effects in a complex simulation.
Definitely. Requires very careful design.
And lastly, in gaming, we saw interrealms used literally as the name for a Minecraft server community. More metaphorical there.
Exactly. In that case, the Interrealms SMP Survival Multiplayer uses the name symbolically. It's branding themselves as a place that brings together different types of players, different play styles, people from different real-world places, all into one shared Minecraft world.
So the realms are more like player groups or geographical locations.
Yeah, it's about bridging those social or geographical divides to build one cohesive, supportive community hub within their game server, using the name to signify connection and inclusivity.
Okay, so quite a range in gaming, from core mechanics to solving matchmaking problems to community building. Let's pivot again. How does Interrealm fuel our imagination? Fiction, fantasy, sci-fi. It feels like a cornerstone genre element.
Oh, absolutely fundamental. Yeah. The idea of separate realities, parallel universes, different dimensions, and the possibility of moving between them or them interacting, it's incredibly fertile ground for storytelling.
So what are the common ways authors play with this? What themes keep popping up?
Well, one of the most basic is just how you get between realms, the method of travel. And writers get incredibly creative here.
Oh, wow.
We saw that Seven Seals world-building project. They had this incredibly detailed, almost sci-fi system, Bifrost crystals, special ships called lanterns, even things called void space engines and fold space engines manipulating space-time. Super structured.
Wow, that's hardcore world building.
Right, then you get the opposite end, like in Keeping It Real, where it's just boom, an accident, a quantum bomb, tears a hole, and suddenly different realities are mashed together. Much more chaotic.
So planned versus accidental connections.
Yeah, and then you have series like Simon Thatcher, where it seems like there are established ways, maybe gateways or portals, connecting these 7 specific known realms of Shalconi, and even some Reddit fiction we found mentioned using a quantum generator for teleporting between a normal timeline and this weird void realm. The inventiveness is amazing.
And once you have these different realms interacting, conflict seems almost inevitable, doesn't it? That felt like another big theme.
Very much so. Differences in resources, magic, technology, biology, ideology, they all create friction. The Elf Captive was a great example, explicitly an interrealm urban fantasy about a war between our Earth and an elf realm. It dealt with espionage, prejudice, peace talks, the works.
Right.
Then you have the Rift cycle with a post-apocalyptic interrealm war based on birth seasons, which is a really unique hook.
Birth seasons. Wow. Okay.
Yeah. And Lightlark, where the interaction is formalized into this deadly competition between the rulers of cursed realms every 100 years, or 10 realms, which sounds like just large-scale, multifactional warfare across dimensions. Even the Reddit stuff hinted at triggers for potential interrealm warfare.
It's like international relations, but cranked up to 11 because the nations might operate under completely different laws of physics or morality.
Exactly. Which leads to the third big thing, just how different the realms themselves are. Authors spend a lot of time defining the unique characteristics of each reality.
Giving each realm its own flavor.
Totally. Keeping It Real had Earth coexisting with elfin realms, elemental realms, demonic realms, all distinct. Yeah. That Simon Thatcher series went deep on its 7 specialized realms. Galantro for resources, Bosorium for something else, Parazorn for magic, Nosphemios. They each had a function, unique inhabitants, even those interrealm games.
7 specialized realms, that's intricate.
Yeah. The Reddit story contrasted the normal timeline with the undefined void. And Lightlark defined its 6 realms by the specific curses they suffered from, which shapes their societies. Making the realms distinct is key to making the interactions meaningful.
It really feels like a massive creative playground for writers. Define your realities, define how they connect, and then see what stories emerge.
That's exactly it.
We looked at a few specific book examples too, right? Like The Elf Captive, really focusing on that conflict diplomacy angle.
Yes, that one dug into the personal and political fallout of war between humans and elves, the mistrust, the attempts at peace across those huge cultural divides.
And Seven Seals stood out for its very structured, almost technical approach to how travel works.
Yeah, that one exemplified the hard approach, really thinking through the mechanics, the how, giving it that internal logic and consistency.
The Simon Thatcher series seemed built around this idea of specialized realms, maybe even cooperating sometimes with those interrealm games.
Right, suggesting a dynamic beyond just conflict. Maybe structured competition, maybe collaboration, a different flavor of interrealm interaction.
Then Keeping It Real felt more messy, focusing on what happens when realms just crash into each other accidentally.
Exactly. The chaos, the cultural clashes, the unpredictability when those boundaries just dissolve unexpectedly. A more grounded, perhaps consequence-focused take.
And finally, Lightlark showed interrealm politics as this high-stakes, formalized, deadly game.
Yeah, ritualized conflict is the primary mode of interaction. These examples just show the sheer range you can get from that one core concept. The interactions can be war, diplomacy, accidents, competition. It's incredibly versatile.
Truly amazing narrative potential. Okay, let's pull back from fiction now and look at the real world again, specifically commerce. How does Interrealm show up as, like, a brand name?
It does pop up. The name itself suggesting connection, new spaces, bridging gaps. It seems appealing to certain types of businesses.
We saw Interrealm in California, an IT consulting firm. Been around since '97, apparently. What's the likely message there?
For IT consulting, Interrealm probably aims to say, we connect technology to your business needs. bridging that gap between complex tech stuff and actual business results.
Right.
It could also suggest they work across different tech environments or industries, different realms of business.
Mm-hmm.
And being around since 97 suggests it's worked for them.
Makes sense. Then there was Interrealm VR, virtual tours. That name feels pretty direct.
Oh yeah, spot on for VR. Interrealm VR immediately says, we transport you to other places, other virtual realities or realms. It perfectly matches the immersive, escapist nature of their product. Travel without moving.
And even a music label, Interrealm Music on Beatport, doing electronic music. What's the vibe there?
For electronic music, Interrealm could imply a few things. Maybe music that's atmospheric, futuristic, exploring different sonic realms. Or maybe a label that connects artists and styles across different electronic subgenres, kind of boundary pushing in sound.
Interesting how the same word fits different contexts.
Yeah.
We did also see Inner Realm, similar sound, but totally different meaning, right? Surfwear.
Yeah, good catch. Phonetically close, but inner versus inter changes everything. Inner realm sounds much more personal, maybe about the feeling inside you when you're surfing, that personal connection to the experience, not about connecting between things.
So Interrealm, as a brand, taps into connection, exploration, maybe accessing advanced or virtual spaces.
Okay.
Now for the really abstract stuff, philosophy, metaphysics. How does the Interrealm idea connect there?
This is where it gets really fascinating, touching on some deep questions. Now, interrealm isn't like a standard technical term in philosophy or physics departments,
Right.
but the underlying idea, distinct levels of reality, different domains of existence, and how they relate. That's a theme that philosophers and even physicists have wrestled with for ages.
Claudia Dawson's personal concept of an afterlife interrealm was mentioned. That sounded unique.
It was. She described this specific transitional space, a kind of rehab realm between death and life, a place for spiritual retraining before rebirth. She specifically set it apart from heaven or hell or other final destinations. Its whole purpose was being in between.
Really leaning into that transitional aspect. And then there were links to broader philosophical ideas.
Yeah, you can see echoes of it.
Yeah.
Think about the whole internal versus external realism debate. That's basically about the relationship between the realm of our minds and language and the realm of external reality. Do we just perceive reality, or does our conceptual framework actively shape it? Some views suggest a kind of interaction, a bridge between those realms.
Okay, and phenomenology, that focus on lived experience.
Absolutely. Concepts like intersubjectivity, how our consciousness relates to other consciousnesses, or intercorporeality, how our embodied selves interact. That's all about the in-betweenness of experience, the connections between the seemingly separate realms of individual minds and bodies.
And the classic mind-body problem, mental realm versus physical realm.
The ultimate interrealm puzzle, perhaps. How do mind and matter interact? You see different takes on this across cultures too, like Akan philosophy's view of physical and spiritual components in a person. Even going way back, Plato's theory of forms posits this huge gap between our messy physical world and the perfect, unchanging realm of forms, and asks how they relate.
It's wild how this between realms idea just keeps showing up in these really fundamental questions about reality and us. And physics, too, you mentioned. Not the term itself, but related concepts.
Right. Things like how different physical theories relate to each other, inter-theory relations. Or, more speculatively, ideas from quantum mechanics, like the many worlds interpretation, or concepts from string theory, like brain worlds, where our universe might be just one membrane in a higher dimensional space. These theoretical ideas definitely fuel the sci-fi depictions of interrealm travel, even if physicists use different jargon.
Okay, wow. We've covered a lot of ground. Technology, games, fiction, business, philosophy. So pulling it all together now, what are the big patterns, the main takeaways from this whole deep dive into interrealm?
Yeah, stepping back, a few key themes really emerge across all these areas. The first and most obvious is connectivity and bridging. It's always about linking things that are separate systems, players, worlds, ideas, creating pathways.
Right.
Second is the crucial idea of boundary management. It's not just making connections, it's controlling them. Security rules in tech, interaction rules in games, the specific physics of travel and fiction, even the logical boundaries in philosophy. How does stuff cross over? What are the rules?
Control is key.
Definitely. And third, whenever you implement these interrealm systems, whether they're real tech or imagined worlds, there's almost always significant complexity involved and a need for careful control to make it work, to keep it secure, stable, or just narratively coherent.
And it seems like there are common tensions or trade-offs that pop up everywhere, too.
Absolutely. We saw that tension between security versus openness again and again in tech. In gaming, it's often community versus convenience. And just generally, there's often a trade-off between the complexity needed to make Interrealm stuff work well and the desire for simplicity in design or understanding.
But despite those challenges, the word itself, interrealm, it clearly has a real pull, doesn't it? It feels evocative.
It really does. It suggests exploration, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Discovering what's beyond. It hints at connection, bridging divides. There's often a sense of mystery, the unknown waiting across the threshold. And frequently it implies advanced technology or maybe even magic, whatever enables that crossing.
Yeah, that mix of exploration, connection, and maybe a bit of the unknown or advanced capability.
That's probably why it works so well for branding and why it's such a powerful engine for storytelling, that sense of potential.
Well, this has been really eye-opening, just tracing that one idea, interrealm, through so many different contexts. It's amazing how it threads through technology, imagination, business, so many parts of our world.
It really is. And it kind of makes you think, doesn't it, about the different realms you move between every day. Your digital life, your work persona, your family life, different social circles, even just different ways of thinking about things.
Mm-hmm.
How do those principles play out for you? Connection, boundaries, complexity. What are the bridges you're building, consciously or unconsciously? What are the walls you run into? What does interrealm mean in your own experience?
That's a great question to chew on. And hey, if any of the specific things we talked about today grabbed your interest, a game, a book series, a tech concept, definitely go check it out, dig a bit deeper. There's clearly a lot more to explore.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for taking this deep dive with us today.